With a rich cultural history and itself becoming a democracy in the 1990s, the Czech Republic and Taiwan share some similarities. However, lesser known are their defense and security ties which are now strengthening amidst increasing pressure from Beijing. So we are here in Prague to find out just where these two countries stand. In this episode, we'll hear from Jakub Janda, the director of the European Values Center for Security Policy, on how defense and security are evolving for Taiwan in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and ongoing rapid defense industry innovation. So you are the first European think tank with a presence in Taiwan, and I don't know that many people know that. What is the importance of that presence being physically in Taiwan?
I believe it brings access and knowledge to my team. So we have headquarters in Prague, Czech Republic, but since late 2021 we have our presence in Taipei, where we have our analysts working every day with their Taiwanese counterparts from Taiwanese government, but also from the expert community in Taiwan. And here in Europe, there is not that much of an in-depth understanding about the security or geopolitical situation of Taiwan in depth, and that's what we are trying to bring by having our presence in Taipei and bringing that back to Europe.
Do you think that there has been a growing presence since 2021 of Taiwan's geopolitical situation?
Here in Europe, absolutely. It comes from, I would say, scare or fear of European governments and the European business community, because they start to understand how much Taiwan matters, how much Taiwan is important economically, but also geopolitically to them. And also everybody can see how much China is getting more and more aggressive. So the fear of possible conflict is actually quite present when it comes to European capitals.
What more could Taiwan do to raise its voice in Europe?
In many ways, what is happening positively are many delegations going from European capitals to Taiwan. Parliamentarians, experts, government officials, all of this is happening. That's very positive. But what we really need is that we need European business community to very much understand how much they need Taiwan, because they have the voice, they have the political power in European capitals. And in that sense, it's perfect that Taiwan is investing, Taiwanese companies are investing in Europe, here in Czech Republic, or for example in Germany, when it comes to the semiconductor plants as well.
And then what can Taiwan learn from this security situation right now in Central Europe?
The situation in Central Europe is relatively similar to Taiwan, but we here in Central Europe have the advantage of having multiple allies, given our geography, and also given that Russia is much weaker than China. So at this moment, what is happening is that essentially Central European governments are essentially doubling their own militaries in terms of scope, funding, or personnel. There is a massive surge of effectively purchasing weapons, but there's also something what Taiwan can learn from, and that's, for example, the drone warfare, UAVs, unmanned vehicles, this is the core of the fight in Ukraine, and there are countries in Central Europe who are learning from that. Because, for example, Innovation Circle, so how quickly do these drones get better in terms of how they operate, that's all very short, only in a matter of single weeks, for example, sometimes. And that's where Taiwan really needs to learn from this, which is not easy, but there are countries like Czech Republic which are actually helping Taiwan in first having access in Ukraine, in supporting Ukraine, like in humanitarian assistance, for example, but also in, for example, dual-use technologies, where there could be, for example, Czech-Taiwanese cooperation on the business side in either assisting Ukraine today and learning from how they operate, for example, the drones, because that's exactly what Taiwan is preparing for itself.
So you said that sometimes these drones, this technology can evolve within a week. Can you talk about some specific examples of how that is happening on the battlefield in Ukraine?
So in Ukraine, more than half of all the combat casualties are actually caused by the drones. That's never happened in human history so far. So it's very new. So every military in the world, on kind of democratic side, on our side, but also on the side of the dictatorships, Russia, China, Iran, or North Korea, they're trying to learn from it. So very practically what happens is that there are innovations in electronic warfare, for example. So for example, drones which were very effective 2 years years ago on the Ukraine battlefield are useless today because there are countermeasures such as electronic warfare, which actually make them useless, that they basically die out very quickly if this is used. So all these countermeasures are happening very quickly, and that's what we need to be learning from. That's, for example, why many countries in Central Europe are effectively not buying new drones now, but they are trying to learn first, because they know that if they buy something today, in 2 years, it would be pretty much useless against the Russians, for example, who are our primary enemy here militarily. So for that reason, we are trying to learn first, so that then we could very quickly, effectively purchase or buy these drones before a conflict.
Taiwan, they are starting to mass produce drones. This is a national security ambition of Taiwan. But if they start producing a bunch of drones this year, next year, and it comes to 2027, 2028, 2029, how can they ensure that these drones that they're producing now stay relevant for the next 3 years?
It's difficult. Admittedly, it's difficult because of Taiwan's capacity compared to China's capacity. So very understandably, Taiwan has a difficult position to do. But what usually is being done is that you essentially start purchasing the hardware, the physical stuff, and then what happens is that there are innovations on the software. So on the kind of brains, on the kind of intellectual part of the command center of the drone, for example. And that's something what happens quite often, because at the end it's about the mass of scale. So what are the numbers which you can easily deploy, but also importantly, if you have enough personnel which can first produce, but then also put them in combat. So essentially run these drones, not only the pilots, but also the logisticians who need to better understand how to put them in the field as well. And for that, the numbers, for example, which we see in Ukraine, those are tens of thousands of people doing it. I mean, and that's Ukraine. So only some of it is comparable to Taiwan, but that's something what usually the militaries in our part of the world, let's say in, for example, NATO countries, and I think in Taiwan or Japan, we are not used to having such a large portion of the military focus on the drones. Usually it's been seen as a specialist tool for ISR, for surveillance or intelligence collection, but this is a centerpiece of the combat itself today.
So, like you said, soldiers now have to understand how drone warfare works. Is this going to change things like medicine on the battlefield, though? Because if there's a casualty, you're not going to be able to get to that casualty as soon as possible because there's just more drones seeing you and coming at you.
Yes, and this is also happening in Ukraine. So there is effectively the kill zones, which means that it's not only the physical front line, but sometimes 10, sometimes even 20 kilometers from the front line, where you cannot easily move around because the enemy drones would effectively kill you. So quite often what happens, unfortunately, in Ukraine, is that you get a wounded soldier and you cannot get to that person very quickly. So what happens is, quite sophisticated ways of getting these people out, exfiltrating them, or, for example, using your own drones to either deliver medicine to them directly, so basically it comes by air and it's relatively safe to do it like that, or sometimes what happens is that Ukrainian military or combat medics, they actually would bring over a drone with first-person view, so essentially a drone with a camera, which comes to the soldier and effectively looks at the wound, so for example to the leg, and gives him the orders or the instructions what to do. So effectively, it would have a camera and it would have a speaker, a loudspeaker phone, and it would tell him, do this, don't do this. And there would be a medic, there would be a medical professional basically behind a computer saying, please do this, and that could save your life. And that's something what happens quite regularly in Ukraine.
Do you think Taiwan is taking good steps in this direction to learn from your observations?
In some of it is. There is quite a lot of exchanges between military intelligence experts from Taiwan and their European counterparts. So Taiwan is very much trying on that, but it's not easy because, for example, in Ukraine, it's very hard for Taiwan to get access. First, before this year, Ukraine was very hesitant. The Ukraine government was very hesitant to have any cooperation with Taiwan because Ukraine didn't want to upset China even more. But now what happens is that China is so openly supporting Russia that Ukraine is very much very critical of that. Yeah.
So we see that drone warfare largely pertains to ground battles, but it's also going to impact naval warfare. And Taiwan being an island, there's going to be a lot of naval warfare involved. What capacities have we seen drones taking up in naval warfare?
Mm-hmm. If you listen to the US Commander for Indo-Pacific, Admiral Paparo, he talks about a strategy called Hellscape. And the logic there is that the Taiwan Strait should essentially become a hell for the possible invading forces from China. And he mainly refers to effectively undersea drones, which could actually present quite a lot of traps for a possible invasion flotilla, for effectively vessels coming from China with soldiers potentially. So that's the logic behind it. It makes perfect sense. It's basically the advanced logic behind what was happening in combat before, which was mining, so putting sea mines into the sea, which is part of this as well. And if you zoom in into Ukraine, Ukraine has been very successful in de facto neutralizing the Russian fleet in the Black Sea, which might be surprising because Ukraine basically doesn't have any navy in the Black Sea. But they were able of doing it through drones, and effectively the Russian Black Sea fleet has partially collapsed because of this. So they are very practical, technical, but also organizational or military lessons, which I know Taiwan tries to learn from Ukraine.
China has proposed building carriers that are largely just for thousands, hundreds of thousands possibly, drones. How do you defend against that?
It's very difficult. I mean, ideally, you kill the vehicle itself, so essentially the carrier. So that would be the best course of action. But once these numbers would be deployed in terms of thousands possibly at one time, it's the only choice you really have is electronic warfare capabilities, which to some extent could possibly jam them or make sure they don't hit the right targets. But the scope of that makes it very, very difficult. Because again, Taiwan has the difficulty of the terrain, essentially being relatively small geographically. So if China decides for deploying such a high number of the drones, but also conventional missiles, for example, it's going to be super difficult for Taiwan to defend itself. So that's why the best choice Taiwan has is deterrence, which is military, but also economic as well. That's why European countries actually matter quite a lot, because China is very much afraid of combined US, Japanese and European sanctions.
Aside from drone warfare, what is the most important security or defense innovation going on right now in the industry?
I would say the command and control systems, which are being updated, I have to say, because, for example, what NATO countries try to teach to Ukrainian defenders has been quite well outdated. And we could see on the development on the battlefield in Ukraine over the last, let's say, 3+ years. And essentially the way how we train for smaller units, for example, so we call it combat of small units, has changed quite dramatically in terms of how they deploy, how they use the drones, how they work on combat casualties, so on military medicine, for example. So that has changed quite a lot. And that's why Ukraine, unfortunately for Ukraine, is a laboratory of effectively not military science only, but also military organization. So there is, for example, NATO understood this. So NATO has established a NATO command center in Poland, which is only focusing on learning from Ukraine and getting those lessons to NATO individual militaries. That's how important it is.
We know that there's a lot of collaboration between the Czech Republic and Taiwan. Not a lot of it is public. Are there any numbers or specific innovation ideas that you can share with us?
I can talk about several things which are publicly known, but they may be not widely known. So, for example, there is an official cooperation between MGIB, Ministry of Justice Investigation Bureau from Taiwan, which is a police and country intelligence agency, and their Czech counterpart, for example. That's something what is publicly known. They have officially signed all their cooperation plans as well, and they visit each other regularly, which is publicly known as well, exchange a lot about effectively intelligence matter when it comes to China. The other thing I can mention, which is relatively unique in European context, is cooperation between national defense universities. So Czech and Taiwanese national defense universities have their own official cooperation where they exchange quite a lot of military knowledge, which is de facto military to military cooperation because they are both military universities. Almost no other European countries dare to do this because they are afraid of Chinese counter-pressure, but on the Czech side, this is, for example, happening.
Thank you for watching this episode of Zoom In, Zoom Out from Prague. For more stories covering Taiwan's defense and security, you can download the Taiwan Plus app or follow us on social media. Until next time.